So detectives say something that will always be hard for families to accept is that the motive for Lucy Letby's killing spree may never be known.
Yeah, so what could drive such a callous and calculated killer? I'm pleased to say we're joined now by the forensic psychiatrist, Dr Sohom. Thank you so much for coming into the studio to help us talk through this. I think what is on so many people's minds this evening is that they cannot conceive how this woman, who apparently led a so-called normal, happy life, was in the middle of the community, could commit these crimes. What kind of light can you shed on what might have motivated her?
Sure. Well, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? What is the motivation? I think the problem is we might never know because she's denied the allegations all the way through. She's not opening up. That might change in the future. But what we can do is we can rule out certain things like mental illness. So some of the women that I assess who kill children, I've met mothers who've killed their own babies, is almost always in the context of mental illness, like delusions about those babies. So in their mind, they think they're doing the right thing. You mentioned Beverly Ollett previously, and obviously there are reflections of her case in this, but I think that's a different motivation because, as your former detective mentioned earlier on in the programme, she had Munchausen's by proxy. Lucy Letby didn't have these mental illnesses. So once you rule those things out, the only logical things to me that remain are this sense of power and control, or some sort of hatred, some sort of jealousy towards the families that she wanted to destroy.
So this post-it note was brought out during the trial. I was there when they first brought it out. I mean, she's expressed the closest we get to a confession, isn't it? On their hate, it says on there, I think she says on a different bit, I am evil. This was explained away by the defence as a sort of mood board, wasn't it? She was just expressing lots of different views. I mean, that may be the only insight we get into her psychology. I mean, do you think she'd sort of let herself, the guard slip for a moment, and that's, what's going on in her head on that post-it note? Yeah,
I think it's exactly that. It surprised me that she did that, really. Why would you carry out something so heinous and then leave yourself open to revealing some evidence? I do think that that's probably a little glimpse into her psyche. So I think a small part of her does actually genuinely feel remorse, shame, guilt. She genuinely thinks that she's evil, but obviously it wasn't big enough to stop her committing these acts, and it also didn't influence her during the trial because, as we know, she denied everything.
One would imagine that anyone who has known Lucy Letby throughout her life, her family, those closest to her, perhaps people who were at school, at university, might be sitting today thinking, were there any signs? Is there anything we could have spotted?
Yeah, and unfortunately, and almost terrifyingly in this case, I don't think there was. There was no red flags. There was no strange behaviour. She had no criminal record. She wasn't an antisocial person. She wasn't abrasive. She wasn't aggressive. So I don't think there were any external signs. But it was the fact that her behaviour, when it was picked up, it wasn't taken seriously. The complaints were brushed under the carpet. To me, it's much more important to jump on the information when it's there rather than to try and look for erroneous kind of symptoms of something that's going on inside somebody's mind.
She was quite sort of haughty when she gave evidence and was cross-examined and everything. Peter Lane saying she hasn't come into court to hear those further verdicts. One wonders if she'll be in court for the sentencing on Monday. So, that is obviously going to be really difficult for the families, isn't it? But there's a sense of, I don't know, really, a sort of confidence that you don't get from seeing those photos, but was there in the witness box.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things I'd say about that. Firstly, you don't know what somebody's really thinking inside. So some people are very able at remaining calm, even though there might have been some emotional turmoil. And I'm sure on some level she was terrified of what was going on.
What impact do you think all of this has had on the families? We've heard a bit from them today, but the not knowing must be something that is so devastating to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think devastating is the perfect word. I can't see how they're going to recover from this. So as well as the mental health impacts like anxiety, depression, potentially post-traumatic stress disorder, particularly for the families that witness their babies dying, there's also going to be psychological and emotional impacts for them for years, decades to come, maybe even for the rest of their lives. I think they're going to really struggle to trust people in authority, especially healthcare professionals.
And some of the worst killers, years down the line, they do confess, don't they? The Moors murderers, I mean, we don't know in this case. I mean, there's the possibility at some point she may reveal what on earth was going on.
Yeah, I think right now she's put up this guard. So in psychological terms, this is a defence mechanism, it's denial. It is possible that over time, over years spent in prison, that she might confess and she might open up into her internal motivations. And I think it's important that we listen when she speaks, because we need to understand what caused this in the first place to try and prevent a tragedy like this ever happening again.
I mean, there are still so many questions to answer, but some justice at least for the families today. Dr Sohom Das, thank you for coming in to talk to us today.